Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Good evening, members, and welcome to the latest of our Wine Society online event series. Tonight, we will be celebrating, we'll be tasting, we will be discussing all things Syrah or Shiraz, depending on your upbringing, I suppose, in part, depending on your preference as well. But more about those two different names a little later in the session. My name is Gil. I'm one of the event managers here at the Wine Society. It's an absolute pleasure to join you this evening. Those of you who may have joined us for our Pinot Noir tasting earlier last year may recall me saying that Pinot is one of my favorite grape varieties. It is. Sadly, though, for me, I have about 5 or 6 favorite grape varieties, and Syrah is definitely another of my personal favorites. So I didn't need too much convincing to put on a tasting surrounded, or an event, sorry, this evening, where we talk all things Syrah Shiraz. And perhaps for some of you this evening, that's much the same. You didn't need too much convincing to maybe crack open a bottle midweek Syrah and join me if this is one of your personal favorite grape varieties. Maybe you're joining us to learn a bit more about this world-renowned globally planted grape, perhaps to learn a little bit more about the variety. And I hope over the course of the next hour or so, I'm able to impart some of those interesting facts, some information about this variety and the style of wine that we can get from it. You'll see as well, I'm on my own this evening. Sometimes we'll have a couple of us event managers or a colleague of mine joining. It is just me tonight, so I would love, as is usual, but especially perhaps tonight, I'd love your interactions. I'd love to hear from you all where you're joining me from. If you have a glass of wine perhaps alongside you, I'm quite nosy in that respect. I'd love to know what you have in your glass and what you think of it. So tonight's tasting, or tonight's event rather, sorry, we're going to be looking at the past, the present, and potentially even looking a little bit into what the future might hold for Syrah. And we're going to do that in part by tasting 4 wines. So I have 4 in front of me. You'll see me glance every so often to my right-hand side, perhaps the left as you're looking. I've got my 4 glasses sitting right there. The bottles are just off to my left. And I'd love to know, maybe you've bought one or perhaps several of these bottles and you're tasting a few yourself this evening, or maybe you've pulled a bottle from your own wine rack, cupboard, cellar, if you have one. It's great to know your own personal journey and relationship with this great variety as we go. And do use, I can see a few of you already are messaging on the chat feature there. That's fantastic. Great to have you all here. Do please continue to do that, talk to each other, and of course to myself as well. I'll do my best to interact through that chat feature. Do make sure, if you are wanting everybody to read your message, that you're clicking it to everyone rather than just to hosts and panelists, which I've now just changed myself. But if you have any questions as well throughout the course of the evening, and hopefully there are 1 or 2, and even more, hopefully I'm able to answer those questions, do please, and this is purely personal help, if you could pop that into the Q&A feature that you'll see at the bottom of your screen here on Zoom. If they do go into the chat, I may well miss them. It really depends, of course. But if they're on the Q&A feature, I will see those. They'll pop up. I've got X number of questions remain unanswered. I've got much more opportunity, hopefully, to be able to answer those questions for you. If you are having any connectivity issues, any difficulties there as well, you can use the chat feature, message me directly, or you can go on the React tab and there's a raise hand. You can do it that way. Of course, you can email tastings@thewinesociety.com. But naturally, I hope that none of those 3 things are required and that everybody's connection is seamless throughout, including mine, of course. So that is enough, I think, of the housekeeping. I think it's high time that we start introducing this particular varietal, Syrah Shiraz. And where better to start rather than its origin story, its foundings, its parentage, its lineage, and where this great variety comes from. And there are a few hypotheses, a few theories, but essentially what we now believe to be the true source or the true origin of this great variety comes from France, from the northern Rhône in particular. So I'm now going to just attempt to share some screens. The first slide here is just what I consider at least a lovely example of the grape variety that we're talking about. So naturally, if you can see this, and hopefully you can, this is a bunch of ripe Syrah grapes. This particular vineyard is in the northern Rhône. I won't state exactly where, but it is a famous vineyard. But it kind of highlights the grape variety that we're talking about here. And we believe very much that the grape originated in the Northern Rhône. The first mention of this grape variety written record is in 1781. So not as old as perhaps some other grape varieties like Pinot, for example, but certainly got some considerable age. And at that point, actually, the author very much seems to, well, it mentions this grape variety in two ways, two mentions of it. The first is Syrah. I'm going to just change the slide as well here to get a little map up of France. So before I talk about the different locations, we can see, hopefully you can see my cursor here on this sort of pink shaded area. This is where we're looking at the Rhône Valley in its entirety. I'll just zoom in a little more and we'll see here. So this is now just the Rhône Valley. We've got Northern Rhône up here where my cursor is kind of hovering over, and then we have Southern Rhône down here. Although both combine to make up the Rhône Valley, they are very different in styles, very different climatically, and the styles of wines, the characteristics of the wines, the grape varieties also differ quite widely as well. So they are quite unique in themselves. But there's mention by this author, as I say, in 1781, of something called Syrah. That's S-I-R-A, and that's from the region of Hermitage, which is this yellow area here. Do let me know in the chat if you can't see this, or it's not particularly clear. I will zoom in a little more with the next slide in a moment. But Syrah from Hermitage is mentioned, and also Carinus from Côte-Rôtie, which is the area right at the very top of the Northern Rhône, so the most northerly area certainly of the Rhône Valley. So two different spellings, two different pronunciations. And whilst the author very much is talking about these two as two separate grape varieties, we now know and believe that it is actually one and the same, and it is the Syrah grape that we know and love, or may love, after tonight's session. So that's where it originates. We also know some very clever individuals have done some DNA testing and have found the parents of Syrah. They are, I'll just stop sharing for a moment actually. Yeah. So the mother of Syrah is a grape variety called Mondius Blanche, which is a white grape variety from the Savoie region. So I say I'll stop sharing, but actually it's always quite helpful to see a little map from time to time. So let me bring the main map of France back up. I may need to do a little move back. There we go. So its mother comes from this region here, so to the kind of northeast of Rhône in the Savoie, so right on the kind of borders of Switzerland and the Rhône Alps. And its father is Dorez, rather, which is an Ardèche variety. So that actually comes from far sort of southwest in this kind of area here. If I zoom in a little more, we can actually see here is Ardèche, and then up in this area here is our Savoie, so a little bit further up to the north. So we can see there that they don't really come into contact, not necessarily, they're in two very unique areas, but we know that Syrah is the child of both of these varieties, so we know that it was a natural crossing. So there must have been some plantings somewhere where they were both planted together in the same plot, and those crossings happened naturally. And it's widely believed that it's in this area here, in the Syrah area of Northern Rhône. So that is very much its origin story. A couple of other points I like to mention at this stage. There is another widely held hypothesis that perhaps the grape variety originated in ancient Persia around the very important sort of wine center known as Shiraz. So that's, as we spell it now, as the grape variety Shiraz, sometimes spelt with a C, but more often spelt with an S. And it came from Persia into France. There is, as I say, a number of individuals who may well believe that particular. If it is true, then perhaps the Australians, who typically call this grape variety Shiraz, I'll talk a bit more about that in a few moments, they may have used the original, the traditional name of this variety, and in fact, actually the French have translated that varietal into their native tongue rather than the other way around. Although, as I say, the widely held belief is that Syrah originates in France, not in that ancient city area of Shiraz. The other point I'd like to make just before we move on is another not parental but potentially grandparental as further DNA analysis, and this is something I find quite interesting, and I mentioned at the top that I'm a lover of Pinot as well, so perhaps it might just be me that finds this interesting, you tell me. But further DNA suggests that perhaps there's a second degree genetic relationship with Pinot. And as we know that Pinot is an older variety than Syrah, it would suggest that perhaps Pinot is the grandparent, or at least an aunt and uncle or uncle of Syrah Shiraz. So I find that quite fascinating, because those of you who know both varieties will know that they produce wines that are incredibly different to one another, and very much like different types of climates as well. But I thought I'd throw that little nugget in there as well, as I found that particularly interesting. So 1781, that was the first mention, as I say, of this grape variety in the Rhône Valley. And it didn't take particularly long, about 20, 30 years, for it to start gaining in popularity and gaining in plantings and kind of moving out of Rhône. And we start to see it traveling down south through the Rhône River. And we're finding plantings in the early 1800s in Provence, in Languedoc-Roussillon, and then right out into the southwest, continued southwest of France. And perhaps at that stage as well, we're starting to see it move across the Pyrenees and into northeastern Spain. In terms of globally, because I mentioned at the very top there, Syrah Shiraz is a globally planted varietal. We find this grape in Argentina, in Chile, in the US, in Canada, in Morocco, which is one of the wines that we're tasting. And I see one or two mentions of that wine already here. So we see this grape very much as sort of taken the world by storm, but we don't have accurate details of when this varietal particularly traveled to some of these locations. One that we do is Australia. Australia, a particular gentleman by the name of James Busby, who was a Scottish botanist, viticulturalist. He took cuttings from Montpellier, not just of Syrah, but several grape varieties, but took cuttings from France of Syrah and planted them in 1832 in first the Sydney Royal Botanic Gardens and then also in Hunter Valley. So we know that particular date, that's when this grape variety was introduced into Australia. And that, again, much like it did in France, it very much quickly took the area by storm. And it didn't just end up staying in Hunter Valley and in Sydney. We now find this grape variety planted all across the wine regions of Australia: Barossa, Eden, Clare Valley in particular, McLaren Vale, and many others besides. Just an interesting point on that, as we're talking between sort of France or global plantings of this variety and Australia as a significance. A few years ago, I haven't got accurate studies up to date, but 2 or 3 years ago, we're looking at plantings, global plantings of Syrah of about 7% of total plantings. In Australia, it's about 46 to 50% of all plantings. So it's by far and away the most important black grape variety, red wine varietal in Australia. And a bit later on, I'm going to talk about and taste, and perhaps you will as well, a wine that has some Australian fruit. That's very much when we're looking at what the future might hold for this grape variety, and indeed wine in general. But more on that in a few moments. As I say, do please throw any questions that you might have for me at any point. I'm having a little look at the chat there, and I'll do my best to answer all questions when I can. But let's have a look at the grape variety itself before we start talking about some of the regions and taste some of these wines. But that's for me. Please do taste your wines already. Don't wait for me to give you that approval. If you do and you wait with me, then I applaud your self-control. I'm only doing so because I'm talking, so I can't taste at the same time. But the grape variety itself, Syrah, this is a thick-skinned grape variety. And as we may know, a lot of the tannins and certainly lots of the color all come from the skin. So if we have thick skins, as we do with this variety, it can very often give us wonderfully deep, intense color on the wine and lots of tannic structure. And that's exactly what we typically find with this variety. We're looking at medium to high tannins. So it's not always very, very high. It really depends on the climate that it's grown in. But we've got small grapes, typically on the bunch, thick skins, medium to high tannins, so not a light wine by any stretch of the imagination. And we've got relatively high acidity. Again, that can change from higher or medium depending on the climate that it's grown in. And it's a mid-ripening grape, so it does need warmth. It requires a bit of warmth in order to ripen fully. We're looking at moderate to warm climates. It's kind of sweet spot, really. It's somewhere around 18 to 23, that sort of temperature throughout the growing season. And wouldn't that be nice for us all to experience that as an average temperature? But that's what we're looking for in Syrah. It's a relatively mid-ripener, but that point at which the grape changes color, so this wonderful term that the French use called veraison, which is a point of the ripening process where the grapes have gone from being dark green in color, as all grapes start off, to start to produce more of the colors that we associate with that particular varietal. So it starts, in this case, it starts to gain that lovely sort of purple black color. That's known as veraison. And the moment from that to harvest is relatively short with Syrah. So from a winemaker's point of view, they've got to, or the grape grower, they've got to really pay attention to that ripening and those sugar levels accumulating and the flavors accumulating and the aromas in the grapes. And it's crucial, that harvest point. So it is one of those grapes that once it gets to that stage, the rest of the ripening is actually very quick. I mentioned the style of wine with Syrah can change depending on the climate, whether it be moderate or more warming climate. And really, we do get two very contrasting kind of general styles. So the more moderate climates will give us a medium body, nice high acidity, and crucially, we're looking at fresh black fruit character, so blackberries, black plums, black cherries, but very much on the fresh scale. And then another signature for Syrah in these styles of climates, in the moderate climate, is a very aromatic, quite almost violet, floral, and certainly a black pepper characteristic. So if you've got a Syrah in your glass right now, if you're picking up those kind of characteristics, it may well indicate that this comes from a slightly cooler or a moderate climate rather than cool, but certainly not warm. That particular climate is what we would generally associate with Northern Rhône. The other is our warm climates, where the style of wine here is much more full-bodied, much more, it's richer, it's more powerfully structured. The tannins are higher, the alcohol levels may well be higher as well. And the fruit will move slightly away from necessarily 100% fresh fruits to a little bit more cooked, perhaps. Certainly riper fruit characters, much more intensity in that respect. And you lose some of those floral aromatics, you lose some of the black pepper, and you get a little bit more of a licorice. So one is very much, that's not to say one is better than the other, we'll all have our personal preferences. But that warmer climate style of Syrah is what we would generally associate with Australia. And there, this grape variety is called Shiraz. If you're not in France, and you're not calling it Syrah, you have a choice. And that includes Australia, which doesn't wholly call it Shiraz. But outside of France, you have that opportunity or that choice. Do we call it Syrah? Do we call it Shiraz? And of course, there are exceptions to this particular rule, but generally speaking, if you're picking out a bottle of wine you've not tasted before, and it's not from France, but it says Syrah on the label, then generally that winemaker has made that conscious decision. The style of wine is more akin to that Northern Rhône, so that moderate climate, more medium body, fresh black fruits, and those lovely aromatics of violets and black pepper. If it says Shiraz, that may well be an indication it's a little bit, it's grown in a warmer climate, and we're looking at a wine that has far more higher tannin, higher alcohol, perhaps definitely more full-bodied, and more on that licorice and that kind of fresh but also cooked black fruit character. So for those of you maybe who are looking and seeing what's the difference between these two varieties, that is of course a very general viewpoint. As always, there's exceptions, but that does tend to work, and hopefully it is a bit of help as well. So I think at this point, talked about what it tastes like. I'm going to bring up a little map of our first wine. Here, I told you I would zoom in. Apologies for this, the mouse isn't working particularly well either. So let me just share here. I'm going to go back one. Right, so I've just zoomed in. The first wine we're going to look at, I thought it made complete sense. I'm talking about the Northern Rhône as the home of this grape variety. Why would I not start with a Northern Rhône wine? And so that's what we have in the glass. Hopefully you can see this. I'll show it again once I'm on full screen as well. But in our glass here, we have a wine from Crozes-Hermitage. So this is this large area here, number 6 on this particular map. Hopefully, again, you can see the cursor. But this is Northern Rhone's largest appellation. And like all of Northern Rhone's red wine producing regions, so we're looking at all the way at the very top here, Côte Rôtie. We've got Saint-Joseph here, number 3. We've got, number 4 here, which again is very large, but split. We've got Hermitage, which is a much smaller area just here. And then we finish with Comna, number 7, just in here. All of these red wine producing regions is 100% Syrah, or near enough 100% Syrah. But in terms of black grape varieties, it is all Syrah. I say near enough because that northern appellation of Côte Rôtie, there is the allowance, the permission to blend, I think it's around 5% of Viognier, which is a white grape variety, to your blend if you wish. It's not something that you must do. Some producers do, some don't. It also would depend perhaps on the particular patterns of that given year. But what that might do to your wine is it will change the complexion and style. It'll add a little bit more of an aromatic lift. It'll add some fragrance and a touch of energy, I suppose, in some cases to that wine. So it does make a bit of a difference. But what is the wine we have in the glass here? And that's Domaine Pochon Crozes-Hermitage, and that's the 22 vintage. In actual fact, all four of these wines come from that same vintage, 2022. And this is produced by a gentleman called Etienne Pochon. His second generation. It was his father, Edouard, who started the estate back in 1964. He joined the estate in 1988. In fact, I think I've got a picture of him. Here he is. Yes, Etienne Pochon. So he joined his father at the estate in 1988. His son, Adrien, is now also involved in winemaking and in the estate now. So we are three generations of the Pochon family here. In fact, there are some vineyards that are still with that original plantings from 1964. So they still have some sort of 61-year-old vines as part of their vineyard plantings. This particular wine comes from 30-year-old vines, so not quite as old as 60, but certainly with a lovely bit of age. It's 30-year-old vines on average. As an estate, they have around 17 hectares. I'm going to show you. So this is from their estate. This is their Syrah planted on their vines. They're from the very south of Crozes-Hermitage. They're quite close to that, towards the south of the northern Rhône, and therefore closer to the northern parts of the southern Rhône. And they say that they get that at those crossroads, they get a little bit of influence from both. So they get that lovely vitality from the north, but they also get the wonderful Mediterranean warmth coming up from the south as well. So they get perfectly ripe grapes and a wine that is medium in body, beautiful balance, lovely acidity in there, lovely length. And if you have the wine, do please share your thoughts. But a wonderful fresh black fruit character and black fruit profile. Let me stop sharing. So as an estate, they turned to full organic practices in 2014. So they use organic fertilizers, they use no herbicides, and biological control of grape worms and other pesticides, other pests as well. As I say, 17 hectares under vine, so it's not a small plot in that respect, but also not one of the largest by any stretch of the imagination. And of those 17 hectares, almost 13 of them are planted to Syrah. They also have about 4 hectares planted to 2 white grape varieties, Marsanne and Roussanne. But we can see there the huge importance and influence of Syrah to Etienne and his son Adrien. So I don't know, members, if you have this wine or another wine perhaps from Crozes-Hermitage, but as a region, it's a fantastic region for your northern Rhône Syrahs that are relatively earlier drinking or have the potential to drink that a little bit earlier. Some of these regions of Hermitage itself, which is close by, Cornas and Carinus as well, they're often producing wines that are very, they're higher in tannins. They've certainly got longevity on their side, but they can be quite powerful, quite tannic at the beginnings and in their youth. So not necessarily wines to drink in the first few years, whereas Crozes-Hermitage is that little bit softer. It's still got a wonderful sort of spicy notes and elegance and finesse and beautiful, very generous black fruit, but certainly you can enjoy this in the much younger age. And this is 22 vintage, as I say. Very smooth, well integrated tannins here, but a lovely freshness, a great acidity and a brightness on the finish there. Very well balanced. Those flavors are very clear of those black fruits, and certainly that little bit of violet. I'm not getting as much pepper, but more of a violet aromatics on them. But yes, as I say, if anyone has this wine, I'd love to know what you're thinking. I'm just going to share, I think I've got 1 or 2 more pictures from this particular estate as well. Back on this picture, actually, we can see here there's quite a stony kind of topsoil, lots of stones in the image here, and they can act as a nice kind of heat blanket almost over the evenings. They'll soak up a lot of that sunlight throughout the course of the day and then slowly just sort of radiate that back out up into the grapes and into the vine overnight. So that'll help just lengthen the growing season. and they're on very steep slopes here, south facing, so we do have some nice aspect and cooler breezes coming down through this off the slopes at night. So it does prolong the season here, creating wines with great balance, freshness, and energy. Also wanted just to show a picture of their winery because it's rather impressive. So here shows a little bit of that steep slope that I'm talking about that they're on. And then here's the winery itself. So this is the chateau that they make the wines. This is obviously during winter. But I thought, what a wonderful setting, what a wonderful place to grow your grapes and to cultivate these terrific wines. I'm just seeing here, the Pochon's fragrant, lots of fruit, quite long. Completely agree with you there. Absolutely. It's not one for keeping for a long time necessarily. It was a very, from memory, I think a very dry, very warm vintage 22. I'm just going to see if I actually had made a quick note of that. I think I did make a little bit of a point. Yes, so a long period without rain. It was very dry. That was it from June through to August. That stressed the vine. So it was much more concentration, I suppose, on the vine, less yields, a lower yield here than perhaps in other vintages. And crucially, this had an earlier harvest. So it was so dry and so warm that actually they were picking these grapes at the end of August and into the second week of September rather than in September. So one of their earliest harvests than ever. But yes, lots of lovely black fruit. Yeah, if you're a lover of Aussie Shiraz, as you're saying here, this might, I don't know, it's not quite the same. As I say, they're very different. One is not necessarily better than the other, but if you do like the more powerfully structured, more body to the wine, more of that black fruit and licorice and all those sorts of characteristics, then perhaps yes. But if you're more a fan of the more sort of lifted fruits, the floral characters, and a little bit lighter body, this will hopefully be the wine for you. But let us move on to the second wine. And I had a quick change of order, as in the order that I was thinking of doing. So I'm going to talk now about our wine from Morocco, which is, if I just bring this up now. Yeah, so that's a picture of the barrel room in Pochon as well, which I love a good picture of an arcing roof in the cellars where the barrels are all sitting. But here's the second wine. So on our travels around the globe, I very much wanted to showcase this wine. I love this as a style, and it's not every day that we're tasting wines from Morocco. But Morocco's got a fabulous history of viticulture. It's been producing wines from long before the Romans. But certainly the Romans, as they did in many other locations, very much sort of took it to the next level and took their almost sort of commercial production of wine. But this is our Syrah du Maroc Tandem, and it's called Tandem for a couple of reasons. It's a collaboration between two wineries, two winemakers. Alain Graillot, who's a Frenchman from Crozes-Hermitage, as it happens, so from the Rhône Valley, and the Moroccan winery Domaine de Thalvin. They are, in fact, they were founded in 1927. This particular estate, Domaine de Thalvin, they were founded in 1927. They are the oldest winery in Morocco. And as the story goes, Alain Graillot was on holiday in the region, and he was cycling past some vineyards, and he stopped and he spotted and realized that this particular vineyard, or these areas that he was looking at, were incredibly similar. Terroir, the soils, the climates, everything, was very similar to Crozes-Hermitage back home. And so I'm sure multiple conversations took place. It wouldn't have happened overnight, but following those conversations, this wine was born, this tandem between Alain Graillot and Thalvin, the Moroccan wine estate. And so Alain Graillot produced this wine from fruit grown in Morocco and at the estate in Morocco. He sadly passed away in March 2022, but prior to that, he had passed over the head winemaking to another Stéphane Marion, who's now the head winemaker, and very much has kept that consistency and the quality focused at the front of their mind. So it's a very different style of wine. We are in the, I'm not sure if it says it quite on there. I'm going to show a little map. Here we go. So we're in northwest Africa. And in terms of the region, so Morocco's got 5 different wine producing regions. There are 14 sub-regions. We're looking, I believe, in this area here. So we're in the Rabat Casablanca wine region, very close to the Atlantic coast, and which plays a huge role in the production of this wine, or actually just the ability for quality viticulture to take place. We have the cooling influences coming in from the Atlantic. We've also got elevation, these vineyards are elevation provided by the Atlas Mountains as well, which add that cooling and moderating influence on an otherwise very warm climate. So we have those two moderators that help control the climate here, draw out the season. It's almost like putting these grapes in the freezer, or in a fridge rather, overnight, with those cool breezes coming down through from the Atlas Mountains and coming in off the coast. We kind of just let the grapes chill overnight rather than bake in too much heat, which again allows for those aromatics, acidity, higher acidity, to be retained, which hopefully, again, if you have this wine in your glass, do let me know, but I think really come through. This is very different. It's got a slightly spicier, almost an earthier character to this wine, more savory, but still with a lovely acidity. A little more tannin perhaps in here as well, slightly, as I say, spicier, a little more grip, but very, very pleasant, very easy to drink, dangerously so. But I'll just show here what I mean about the. So this is a picture of a vineyard here in Morocco. I'll just stop sharing there. So I've just seen a question here. So despite the religion, is wine part of the local culture? It's as I say, there's a huge history of viticulture here. There was also a large period of time where wine was not produced here, very much for religious reasons. But it's a great question, one that I think I want to do a little bit more research in terms of what the local culture for viticulture and wine is here. So I will come back to you. I'll try and share that in an email that I send around later this week to you all. Just make sure I get the right answer rather than sort of what I might be guesstimating or assuming. But a great question, and thank you for that. I will come back to you on it. But really enjoying this wine I'm seeing here from another member. Pleasantly surprised by the depth of flavour. Yes, absolutely. It's definitely got a lovely depth of flavour, good length and the finish here. I'm still very much picking up noticeable what the flavours are I'm getting. But I'm hoping for those of you that might have both, or who are familiar with Crozes-Hermitage, or indeed this wine, it's different. It's showing those differences. It very much sort of speaks of its terroir perhaps as well. But a wine that I was very keen to show because it's got a lovely story behind it, certainly in terms of that chance meeting on the bikes, but also it's a terrific wine. And as I say, an opportunity to try a wine from Morocco. I'd love to know if anyone who has this, is it the first time that you're trying a wine from Morocco or from Northern Africa? I'd love to know if that's the case. Let me have another taste. Enjoyed the Pochon aromas. Yes, fruit, some floral, absolutely subtle spice, good acidity, smooth and tasty. Finding the finish long but rather drying. Okay. Everything was going so well to the end there, but yes, perhaps just maybe the tannins are coming through a little more on the finish and having that drying effect, and maybe a little more time in the bottle, just to smooth that out. Could well be what you're looking for, and what would make that wine that bit better. Yes, first wine from Africa. Rugby. You're in rugby. Sorry, in rugby. I thought you were playing rugby. Trying the wine with a little bit more age. Absolutely. So yes, so members there trying the 2019 vintage of Tandem. As I say, this is the 22 vintage. So a wine with a little bit more age will maybe allow some of those softer characters to come through, the tannins to become that little bit more integrated, still have that wonderful grip, but a wine that can easily see a few years. Absolutely. Brilliant. Our first wine from Morocco won't be our last. Excellent. I love that. Terrific. So on to our third wine, and we move from Northern Africa to South Africa. Seamless change there. Let me just get the next wine slide up. And this, South Africa. So before I get the slide up, South Africa has again a huge and lengthy and vast history of viticulture, spanning several hundred years. We think of it as a relatively new wine producing region. It's anything but. Viticulture has been here since the 1600s. We're talking easily 400 plus years. But Syrah wasn't one of the very first grape varieties here. No, not at all. And they're one of the countries I mentioned at the beginning where it's hard to kind of pinpoint, or I was struggling to find exactly the first sort of reference of this grape coming into the nation. We know it's been grown in South Africa for over 100 years, but I couldn't quite pinpoint, like I have with Australia, that sort of moment and when it came in. But it's by no means necessarily the first grape variety that we think of when we think South Africa. If we're thinking red wines, we may well think of Bordeaux blends, Cabernet Sauvignon, Merlot, these sorts of grape varieties. Maybe we think of Pinotage, a variety that's absolutely synonymous with South Africa. We may rather think more about white wines and Chenin Blanc, or Chardonnay, Sauvignon Blancs even as well. But Syrah is not necessarily the first grape variety that we think of with South Africa, but it very much should not be ignored. I think South African Syrah, as well as South African wines in general, are just going from strength to strength from a very high place, and they just continue to rise. And I'm very excited by the journey, excited by a lot of the young, very talented winemakers that are coming through in South Africa and have been for the last 20, 30 years and continue. It's a really exciting time to try wines from this particular part of the world. And they are, as I say, incredible quality. So that's the third wine that we have here. I'll just get the slide up to share. So a fairly new wine for us. And this is the Carinus family Syrah from Stellenbosch. So it was a wine that was very much new to me over the last few months, but definitely a wine and a producer and a family that I will be keeping a close eye on. Personally, I'm a big fan of these styles. And Carinus as an estate, they are, there's two gentlemen. There's Danny, who we mentioned here on the screen, and Hugo. They're cousins and friends at the same time. But they both have been making wine for a number of years, and they are sixth generation grape growers. They started making wine together in 2011, so reasonably recently. But as I say, they have been grape growing and producing wines for several generations before then, not themselves, obviously, but as part of that 6 generations. Danny is from an area called Blue Gum Grove, which is in Polkadrai. So I'll bring up a map in a few moments, but it's just to the southeast of Stellenbosch, the city, as part of the Stellenbosch region. Hugo is from an area called Fransmanskraal, which is a little closer to the city of Stellenbosch itself, and that's where the winery, I believe, is situated. And what I love about what Hugo and Danny do is they collaborate with other winemakers to create their range of wines. The focus is always on quality, not quantity. And they have wines that are made from grapes grown in the Rhône Valley, in Swartland, and in the Polkadrai Hills. So let me bring up a little slide here, which hopefully shows us the map of South Africa. Here we go. So I hope you can all see this. And we're looking at Stellenbosch is this area here. So we're not far from Cape Town. We're not far from False Bay, which is in the region here, which plays an incredibly important role for this particular wine, which comes from the Polkadrai Hills. So as I say, in that southeastern area. But they also have grapes from Swartland, which is further up to the north here, and also in Rhône Valley, which is also within Stellenbosch, I believe. But we'll zoom in a little more. Here we go. So we're in the Stellenbosch area. Here, so we can see the proximity to the coast, the little insert, which might be a little more difficult to see. But I've also just zoomed this in a little, because where we're looking for this wine is in this area here. So not far from sort of Saxonburg, who are one, I believe, of the first producers to plant Syrah in this area. And it's a region that's very up and coming. It's cooler. It has a great influence from the False Bay, which is only about 14 kilometers away. And so you've got the significant cooling influence. It is now one of the 8 recognized official wards or sub-regions of Stellenbosch. It has been since 2006, but it is an area that's still relatively new. And Syrah, it's got granite soils, which Syrah very much enjoys growing in. And it's an area that's been identified by lots of winemakers, these pioneering young maverick winemakers, as you might say, as an area of great quality Syrah. And who am I to disagree with them? So again, if you have this in your glass, this takes a very different turn. This is far more savory. There's more meaty, kind of leathery, licorice character. It's certainly showing signs of warmth. I say there's that cooling effect of False Bay, but it doesn't mean it's cool by any stretch of the imagination. I'm just seeing here a message. South African Syrah is incredible. Completely agree with you. Porcelainberg, Lucas van Noggerenberg, Graft, and High Hopes blends. Absolutely. Now, it's interesting that you mentioned Lucas van Noggerenberg there. He's a producer, members you might be familiar with. We've had the pleasure of working with him from the very first creations of his wines in 2016. This is actually, I mentioned that they collaborate with other winemakers. This particular wine is a collaboration with Lucas van Logerenberg. So if you have this, I'd love to know if you like this as much as his own wines. Not keen on the smokiness of this wine. I see what you mean, absolutely. There's definitely got that kind of oaky smoke character, very much a kind of smoky spice. So yes, if you're not a fan of smoky wines, then perhaps this isn't a style for you. Maybe more of those kind of Northern Rhône or those fresher, clean fruit characters might be more for your preference. But it's an area, as I say, that's a really interesting, fascinating region. And I think we'll see a lot more of this area, Pochon Hills, over the next few years for sure. But it's minimal intervention in the cellar. The grapes are, as I say, very quality conscious, and that's certainly what Lucas does. It's all about quality. It's all about that rather than quantity. I don't know if you can see the color, but it's got a terrific, almost a slight purple hue to that, little bit of purple and blue character alongside the ruby red. But again, an indication of its youth. It is 22 vintage still, so this is definitely a wine that will age and develop. What have we got here? Love this wine, our favorite so far. Okay, love the wording on the back of the bottle. Now you're making me have a look at the back of the bottle, which I have here, so I'll show you the bottle there for you. Okay, yes, okay. I don't know if I'll read it out there, but lots of the way we know the lay of the land, the way of our fathers have taught us. It is absolutely, yes. So 6 generations, they very much know this land. And Lucas is a tremendously exciting winemaker, a lovely individual, a lovely gentleman as well. Had the pleasure to taste with Lucas in Stellenbosch this January. Wow, okay. Head over heels for them is an understatement. Yes. Now the question there about whether we can start selling Lucas rosé, it's not sadly something I can answer, but I'll certainly pass that message on to Matthew, our buyer for South Africa. I'll let him know. But yes, definitely that smokiness is absolutely there. What have I got here? I found the Maroc quite savory. Yes. The Carinus is outstanding value, in my opinion, both fruit and game flavors, good length. Absolutely. It has that smoky, meaty gaminess to it. Very, very much. Let's have a little taste. Mm. Oh, I see that. Right. So there's a, yes, just see in the chat there, perhaps the part on the bottom of the label is the kind of the warning, the health warning. That's something actually that's on all South African wines, I believe, have that warning about yes, don't drink and walk on road. So it is something actually that is a big sort of social issue in South Africa, hence why it's on the labels, absolutely. But yes, it's not something I've seen on labels any other country. Hopefully this is something that is being addressed. I'm sure it is, and that these labels help with that particular issue. But yeah, so well, lots of love there for the Carinus. Blackberry smoke, opens more mushrooms, a touch of black cherry, plenty of spice, lovely flavor. Yum! This is fantastic. I love that. Yeah, so if you like this style of wine, absolutely, Lucas is someone I would actively encourage you to taste his wines and seek out wines from this particular part of Stellenbosch, as well as further afield. There are Syrah, as mentioned before, all the way across the Western Cape of South Africa that is well worth finding, seeking out, and tasting. And let us know any gems that you come across. So that is our South African wine. So that's our 3. We're 3 out of 4 of our wines down. We've visited France, the home of Syrah in Crozes-Hermitage with Domaine Pochon to begin. We've gone to Morocco for a fabulous, savory, spicy Syrah from Northern Africa. We've then traversed down to the south of that particular continent, South Africa, and into that gorgeous Carinus from Pochon Hills. And then we finish with a wine I mentioned at the beginning about possibly looking not just at the past, not just at the future, the present of Syrah, but let's also look at the future of Syrah, and not just Syrah, but actually the wine we're about to talk about is perhaps a style of wine that we might find across all grape varieties or several grape varieties. So it's not something that's necessarily just for Syrah, and that is a wine that is blended with fruit from different countries. So you might be familiar with blending wines generally within a region between grape varieties. Perhaps you have a cooler vineyard and a warmer vineyard. and you blend together. And blending can add a consistent style, but it can also definitely add complexity. Excuse me, you might want a grape variety that adds higher acidity. And so you pair one that's got lovely dark fruit characters, dark red fruits, dark black fruits, but lower acidity with high tannins and a lot of sort of body and character. But you want that to be balanced. So you might blend in a grape variety that has a little bit higher acidity, perhaps some red grape, some red berry fruits as well, just to balance out and add that complexity and give the wine some extra character and depth. But perhaps we've not had that often a wine that blends grapes from 2 different continents and from 3 different sources. And that is our final wines. Let me just share with you the final set of slides. And that's not what I want to do. Let me do it this way. Here we go. I'll move on to the next slide. Perfect. My apologies, this is a little bit smaller than some of the other screen grabs, but as you can see, we've written lots about the wine. So I had to reduce it a little bit in size just to get it all on the caption. But this is our Society's Generation Series Hemispheres Red. Members, perhaps some of you are familiar with this wine already. Perhaps you've read about the wine. You may have tasted it, you may not have tasted yet. This formed one of, this is one of a pair of wines that we released last year as part of our Generation Series, where we celebrated our 150th anniversary. And this was part of our 4th and final series, so a look to the future, what the next 50 years may look like. And we came up with a very groundbreaking concept, this idea of blending a wine with Syrah from Australia and from France. And it was something that we weren't sure if it would be possible. Could we do this? But it's been made possible. It isn't something that would be able to be sold as wine or sold in the EU. In the EU, we're not allowed to sell wines or blend from different countries from within the EU and outside of the EU. But of course, in England and Britain now, we can, because we can decide that for ourselves. And so actually this wine is only available or only possible because of that particular vote, which I won't mention. But it has allowed us to create this really unique and incredibly characterful and groundbreaking wine, this blend of Shiraz from Heathcote in Victoria in Australia, and Syrah from 2 different areas of France. We have the Roussillon and we have the Northern Rhône. And if you can see there, perhaps it is produced for us by the Chapoutier family, by Maxime Chapoutier. And they've got a lovely connection with various countries, actually. So they're based in they're based in the Northern Rhône. Their heartland is in Hermitage, we can see from the picture here. The fruit for this one doesn't come from this particular vineyard, but I wanted to show this because it's got that lovely sign, Chapoutier Hermitage. And this is where they're based, but they've got interest, they've got holdings across the world. So not just in Tandem Hermitage in Rome, but they do very much have a global view to wines. They have winemaking practices, and they're busy with projects in the Roussillon, in Germany, in Portugal, and they've also got a historical connection with the town of Heathcote in Victoria as well. So that's kind of how this wine came about. Our buying team decided to, with that look to the future, what might that be? Let's blend. And the original blending of this, so the wines, or rather the wine was sort of shipped here in bulk and blended here in the UK. I'll just stop sharing for a moment. But originally, sorry, now as I've stopped sharing, I can see much better value than the new Grange La Chapelle. Yes, there's a slight difference in price between those 2 wines, absolutely. La Chapelle from Hermitage, one of Chapoutier's finest wines, one of the finest wines on the planet. But originally, the idea was fruit from Heathcote, which is very famous for its Shiraz, and fruit from the Rhône. And when they blended this wine, and Maxime was tasting, and our buying team were tasting this wine, it was very pleasant, very nice, but it was missing something, they were saying. I remember speaking to Marcel about this. It was just missing a little something. And so they decided to bring in a 3rd component, which was Syrah from a vineyard that they own, a Chapoutier own in Roussillon in southwest France. And that was the missing component. As soon as that came in, now we had a wine that got the big thumbs up. And so this is a blend of 100% Syrah or Shiraz, but as I say, from those 3 separate regions and from 2 separate continents. let alone two separate countries. So very unique. If you have this in your glass, if it's the first time you're tasting, please do let me know. Excuse me, what you think. But we've talked about Rhône, Northern Rhône, so it's got this style of wine is a little bit more on that medium body, higher acidity, lower tannin. Roussillon, I do think I've got a little map, or I might not have a map actually, but I think I've got an image. I'll just show a couple of other pictures. Here's the next one. Perfect. So let's go to the Australia first. Our map of Australia here in full Technicolor. If we zoomed in on this region here that we can see, so I'll just hover over it, this lovely kind of oval, which shows lots of Victoria and South Australia. And the particular region we're looking at is this area here, Heathcote, or sorry, this area, Heathcote. And here we are quite a distance we can see in from the Pacific, or sorry, from the ocean there. So you would perhaps think there isn't much of an influence. We're 100 kilometers north of the state capital of Melbourne, but there is a lovely kind of, there's the Mount Camel ranges that we can't see on this picture, but that float up, and they create a bit of a funnel for the cool summer winds to blow down that funnel and get all the way to Heathcote. So it does, even though it's that far inland, it still very much gets these nice cool summer breezes, and that just extends the growing season. As I said before, it kind of slows the ripening down and allows the possibility for not just healthy and very full ripe grapes, absolutely, but with freshness and brighter acidity and lovely aromatics, high quality Syrah fruit. And that is what Heathcote's very much famous for, is its Syrah or Shiraz. My final picture, I think, we go back here, so back onto our map of France, and when I said Roussillon, it's this area just here, so right on the south or southeast, I suppose, there, but on the Mediterranean, right on the borders with Spain. That is Roussillon, and that's where the third component, and this is just a picture of I'd say just a picture, it's a fantastic image, but showing you a vineyard of Roussillon. It's very hilly, there's lots of mountain range, lots of peaks, lots of hills, very stony, and those kind of gravel characters and schist soils, very warm as well in this part of the of France. A fabulous area, but here it's sort of pockets. We don't have huge expanse appellations and vineyard plantings. It's very much quality, certainly not quality, lower yields and small plots, small parcels that the producers own and work with, rather than vast expanses of wine of viticulture and vineyard size and space. And yeah, still close to the Pyrenees, absolutely. Is there any wine grown in the UK vineyards? Okay, not that I've come across. Not that I've come across there any Shiraz Syrah in the UK yet. I think we are probably still a bit too cool a climate for that. If I'm honest, I'd be more than happy if we maintain that cooler climate and too cool a climate for it, because it would be perhaps a bit of a concern if we were to fully ripen and successfully and consistently ripen. But I'll keep an eye out. And members, if you come across an English Syrah, Shiraz, do let me know. There may well be, I'm sure there's planting somewhere. But I've just got a message. Yeah, I was seeing here, love the wine. This is talking about this particular wine, the Hemispheres Red. Love the wine. Well, let me just come back up. Sorry, that's moved up. Yeah, lovely wine, but the concept itself, because we're blending from 3 different areas, it sort of loses a sense of place. I know what you mean. I absolutely know what you mean. It's very much something that's sort of been discussed and commented absolutely before. Yes, that kind of the terroir that the French love to say, that kind of sense of place, the climate, the soils, the aspect, all those elements. You do lose a little bit of that, of course, because it's not from just one separate location there. But I think if I was to taste this wine, not knowing what it was, not knowing that it was a Shiraz or Syrah, I'd like to think, hard for me to say so because I'm tasting it now and I know that it is, but it certainly has those characteristics that I would associate with the grape variety. So I might not be able to pinpoint exactly where, but it absolutely, to me, evokes those sort of memories of, okay, this could well be a Syrah, Shiraz. And as a wine itself, I think it's very, very good. It's smooth. It's got a lovely character. And the carbon footprint there as well mentioned. I will get some figures to this because again, it is a comment that is made absolutely. But because we're blending this wine in the UK, the carbon footprint is certainly nowhere near as high as it would be if we were shipping bottles, which of course weigh much more. But I'll see if I can get some proper facts and figures there to back for you for these questions, because they're very much fair points, absolutely. But I wanted to show this wine because it is very much that sort of, we created the wine with a view of what the history might, what the future rather might be. As I say, there is a white version of this, a variant of this. It's not a single varietal. It's Marsanne and Viognier. And again, fruit from Australia, from Victoria and from Rhône as well. But obviously we're not tasting that tonight. Is the experiment likely to be repeated? Great question. Not something that that I'm in a position, of course, to answer there, not being one of the buying team, but I'll certainly ask the question to our buyers, and is this something that they might be looking down the line? And again, if I can get an answer quickly, I'll let you know quickly. Is this a wine for aging? Ooh, now that, because it's so unique, because it's different, we don't have a wine to kind of look at from previous vintages. We can't sort of have some stored, and we're seeing its progression. A case is put to one side in the cellar. So, a great question. One that I think we're still sort of looking. Let's see how long this wine will age. If I go, let me have a quick look. Sorry, whilst we're on here though, because it is a fantastic question. Let me see what we've put as our drinking window, because for me this is more of a short to medium term drinking wine. That's how it's tasting to me. Yeah, so we're saying drink from now to 2029. So drink over the next 4 years or so. Yeah, so a wine very much for the immediate and sort of midterm, rather than one that I would set down on and let age for a number of years. But an exciting experiment, perhaps. Put a few out to one side and see how it develops over the next few years to come. Well, so that I thought there might be a few questions and a few points raised on that particular one, because it is such a groundbreaking, as I say, experiment, style change, and sort of approach to what we're used to and what we're familiar with. And it may be that this isn't something that sort of we see more regularly in the future, but who knows what the future may hold. And it's certainly something that is of a huge interest, if nothing else. How do you? I'll just look at a question here. Out of Oz by sea, yes. I don't know exactly how it's actually sent across to us from France. I'm coming across this. I haven't got these answers. These are great questions, and I love questions that I don't necessarily have the immediate answers to, because it forces me, quite rightly, to find out those answers. So I will find out exactly and get far more information about this and send that detail across to you. But if you have any other questions, is anybody tasting a wine that isn't from one of the countries that we're talking about here this evening? So perhaps a Syrah from Chile, or from Spain. Actually, I just meant to see here. I love the contest with the different wines. We had a Spanish Syrah too. So interestingly, Spain, in terms of where Syrah is planted, France dominates, as you might expect, in terms of plantings. But the top 5, and I'm just going to make sure I get this in the right order. So I'm quickly scanning back up here. Number 1 is France. Number 2 is Australia. That's not going to come as a surprise to any of us. But number 3 is Spain. So Spain has the 3rd highest plantings of Syrah. Argentina is 4th, and then it's South Africa that picks up 5th place. And I think it's something like 35% of the global plantings of France, 20% of global is in Australia, and then I think it's 10% in Spain. But that was quite surprising to me, because we don't typically associate Spain generally with Syrah. There are areas, of course, that are producing outstanding examples of the grape, and perhaps we could have shown one of those, but I could only show 4. We only had an hour or just over. But yes, this particular variety is grown the world over. If you've got a moderate, warm climate, it is definitely a great variety that we're seeing boom in terms of us as consumers loving the style, the variety of styles. So members, we're coming up to 7 o'clock now. As I say, please do, if you've got questions, fire them my way. I see one here. Okay, yes, about the last wine there. Anybody who's trying it, what do you think? We'd love to know your thoughts. Watch out for Washington State Syrahs too. Absolutely, James. Yes. we could do this event again, and I could pick 4 completely new different wines from 4 completely different areas. Washington State, yes. We've got Chile, Argentina are producing wonderful styles. In Argentina, they tend to perhaps be a little bit more in blends with Cabernet Sauvignon, Malbec, rather than necessarily 100% Syrah, but there are examples of that, absolutely. Cooler climate right on the coast of Chile. We're finding some wonderful examples there, and incredibly good value wines, and consistently high quality. Chile is one of my go-to locations if you're wanting incredible quality wines that speak of their place, wines that speak of their grape variety, but with an incredibly good price point to boot. And certainly New Zealand, in areas like Hawke's Bay, Gimlet Gravels, has some wonderful examples of Syrah there as well, and many others besides. So see here, yes, seems to be exploring more and more varietals. I'm trying a South Australian Shiraz bought. Okay, it's more towards the natural side. Yes. All right, a little bit more earthy than expected. Yes, Australia, as we know, those of us who've bought Australian wines, try Australian wines. Every grape variety is planted in Australia. It's got a tremendous range of climates, microclimates, viticultural opportunities, soil structures as well, and it's got very much that kind of maverick winemakers who will have give them a go and really push boundaries as well with these groundbreaking options. So yes, you can easily find the more moderate climates, the fresher black fruit, peppery, medium acidity, medium bodied styles of Syrah inspired, Northern Rhône inspired wines from Australia, alongside those big blockbuster full bodied licorice driven cooked and fresh fruit characters that perhaps we're familiar with in Barossa Valley in particular. But yes, so here we enjoyed the French the most, then the blend, okay, yeah, and then the Moroccan and South African. Wow, all 4 fantastic. Yes, the French, I don't know, I think I quite enjoy all 4 of those, but yes, members, I really hope that you've had a great evening. You've enjoyed tasting your way perhaps through one or more Syrah, and listening to me ramble on about a grape variety that I love. I have been following a few notes that I did make, just to make sure that I don't go off on too many tangents. Those of you that have attended events with me before, or perhaps that have met me and sort of chatted in person at events, will know that I can get carried away with excitement of various wine related topics. So I did try and keep that so we could keep to within the hour. So I'm thrilled that we've been able to. But it's been great fun spending the evening with you. Thank you so much. Enjoy the rest of your weeks, and I look forward to seeing you again at another event soon, whether that be online or in person.